Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, now we have Dr. Sharma on
Yeah.
the panel. So we can begin now, sir.
Yes, please.
So, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome once again, and we are ready to begin with the second part of day one, which is the panel discussion on medical devices. And before we begin, we once again welcome and thank all our exhibitors, session panelists, and visitors to the inaugural PHDH virtual event, and hope you all have visited the wonderful exhibits. Several Indian and foreign companies are participating, and we encourage you to see displays after the session or at any time till September 25th, 2020. We also encourage you to inform your friends and colleagues to register and participate in the several sessions that are scheduled over the next 3 days. And ladies and gentlemen, we are also aware that many foreign delegates are in the audience, and we thank them for attending despite the time difference. And now we begin with the medical devices session. Our eminent panelists for this session are our distinguished moderator would be Mr. Krishna Kumar Shankar Narayanan. He is the Executive Director, Health Affairs, PwC India. Mr. Rajiv Nath, Forum Coordinator, IMED. Dr. J.K. Sharma, Managing Director, AMTZ Limited. And Mr. Vibhav Garg, India Chair, APAC Med, APAC Med. So, ladies and gentlemen, the medical devices constitute one of the focus areas of the government of India over 75 years. 75% of the devices are imported. India has abundant engineering talent, and in order to facilitate plants to boost local manufacturing, several new schemes have been launched by the central government. To discuss the potential and plans of the medical devices sector, we have a very knowledgeable panel that is being moderated by Mr. Krishna Kumar Shankaranarayanan, from PwC India. And I now invite you and hand over to you, sir, to kindly moderate this session on medical devices transforming India's potential into reality through international collaborations. And the time duration for this session is approximately 1 hour. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sapna Gupta, and a very good afternoon to all the panelists as well as the participants who are joining this event from around the world. We understand that this is an interesting topic for all of us, and we would certainly try and get the best of inputs from the very eminent panel that we have with us today. Just a couple of housekeeping rules to start with. So if you have any questions, this is especially for the audience, if you have any questions, please WhatsApp your questions to 98716 32688. That is 98716 32688, and we will try and answer as many as possible during the session. And in case there are any questions which remain unanswered, we will try and reach out to you offline with the answers from the panel. So with that background, let's kind of dive into the session. The first question is for Mr. Rajiv Nath. Indian medical devices industry contributes less than 2% of the global medical devices industry. So how can India play a bigger role in the global medical devices space? Mr. Nath, over to you. Mr. Nath, can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, organizers, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of the webinar and part of the expo. India has a huge engineering and scientific talent. If we can do well in automotive, IT, pharma, there's no reason why India cannot do well in medical devices. What India does definitely need, or the manufacturers they need, which they're not having for quite some time, is supportive policies and access to some infrastructure. When we say infrastructure, we mean access to test labs to demonstrate their quality, compliances to standards, medical device parks, which has got common manufacturing facilities so that they can reduce their capex and can have supporting OPEX from the state governments. And also existing 8 clusters with 19 cities or towns in them, they need to be strengthened up with supporting policies and similar infrastructure. In terms of supporting policies, the government needs to ease cash flows to the manufacturers, especially during COVID times. So whatever supplies are being made to the various central state government, it will help the manufacturers and the liquidity if they get paid on time as per contractual terms. Secondly, anybody who's putting up plant in India, whether from Korean collaboration or a Japanese collaboration or Israeli joint venture, whatever, would be seeking some level of tariff protection, like we have done for the mobile phone industry. So a predictable policy is required, not necessarily ramp it up straight away, but when somebody starts manufacturing and there is ample proof given of capacities and capabilities, then protection needs to be given. WTO permits till 40%. We are not asking 40%, but definitely 10 to 15% custom duty is required. There needs to be a ban on or a restriction on import of pre-owned medical equipment, and there needs to be a distinct preference based on domestic content, based on quality, based on innovation in public procurement. Ethical manufacturing and marketing needs to be supported strongly. Currently, many ethical manufacturers and idealistic engineers, when they launch their products made in India or imported into the country, they do find that even if the product pricing is being very competitive, they're not succeeding unless they play the market. And playing the market means indulging in unethical ramping up of the MRP artificially and inducing the hospitals and retailers to use trade margins to push their products, which is avoidable. We do have the medical devices rules, but the rules are still under the law. And the current law is an old law which treats many of the issues and business people to be treated as a criminal. These are engineering products. It is time to move away from the archaic Drugs Act for its own independent medical device law, which will promote innovation, promote quality, promote patient safety, and promote manufacturing, and convert most of these penal actions into civil penalties or punitive actions. Only the rarest of rare cases, we need to make it a criminal action. It'll be very unfortunate if many of the automakers or the garment manufacturers who have in the last 4 months ventured into making PPE coveralls or masks or ventilators would start leaving this area of manufacturing when they start finding that they are facing drug inspectors who are asking them or making them accountable for things which they had not imagined, as it's a new line for them. They are engineers and they would like to be treated as engineering field. Those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you so much, sir. That's quite an exhaustive list of ideas that you've given us. Moving on to Mr. Garg, one of the things that the government has done in the last 6 months is to announce a scheme for medical device parks across the country. They've also announced a production-linked incentive scheme for specified categories of medical devices. From the point of view of global medical devices companies, what are your thoughts about these two schemes, and will it help increase domestic manufacturing of medical devices?
Thank you, Mr. Krishna Kumar, for the question, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for inviting APECMed and myself to this session. So I think coming to the question, Mr. Krishna Kumar, the two schemes that you're referring to, I think are great schemes, and APECMed is very supportive of both the schemes. I think if I talk first about the PLI scheme, it's definitely a boost for global manufacturers of medical devices that are member of APECMed. There are more than 150 global companies who are members of APECMed, and we truly appreciate this initiative from Government of India, Department of Pharma particularly, where they have brought in a very, I would say, progressive scheme in terms of bringing in incentive which are linked to production and obviously the sales after that every year. This is definitely going to increase the visibility of India as a base for manufacturing of medical devices, production of medical devices in the global scenario. And therefore, I think it is also important equally that the scheme is reaching to all the stakeholders, who are potential, I would say, participants in this scheme with all the details. However, couple of areas that we would wanted to highlight was, I think in the beginning, it was discussed that I think the scheme would ask for investment for first 3 years, and then I think incentives post 3 years of investment. That was the impression. And then, so because what happens is, I think it is, we understand that I think many companies in India, medical device companies in India, are in a very small scale manufacturing, and I think which is probably less than 50 crores or maybe less than 20 crores of kind of a size. And I think expecting an investment, of 60 crores for 3 years, and then revenue of 120 crores against an investment of 60 crores, when the base is low, I think will be little too ambitious ask, I would say. And therefore, I think if we can bring it to a level which is more practical, would be very helpful. So that's, and I think another area that we wanted to bring to the consideration was that medical devices is a very innovative sector when it comes to production, and I think it is the incremental innovation is a norm in medical devices. And I think that's where, when we talk about production or manufacturing, it is very important. And I think, and I've seen that appreciation in the officials in DOP, Dr. Sharma himself, that I think R&D is a definite precursor to manufacturing in medical devices, because you do 2-3 years of 4 years of your innovation research cycle, and then you reach to a design or a very helpful from investment perspective. So that's about PLI, the thoughts of APECMed members in that. And now coming back to I think the medical device parks, Mr. Krishna Kumar, I think that's a very parks with all kind of infrastructure facility around. So I think if you see those things where you have a regulator right there, when you have a supporting labs right there, so I think that makes it a very natural ecosystem, when you're developing it. However, there'll also be a important area which I think Rajiv also raised, is that we already have a few manufacturing clusters within the country, right? And they came by natural in last few years. So I think if those also can be considered as as manufacturing cluster or hubs to be able to offer those benefits which are offered maybe to a park or other hub will be very, very useful for companies who have already invested into the country. And many of APEC members have invested into the country in last so many years, actually. So that will be very, very useful for the members. So I'll take a pause there and get back to you, Mr. Krishna. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vibhav. It's quite helpful to understand the perspectives of APAC-Med members, not just on the PLI scheme, but also on the medical devices parks. If I were to now go to Mr. Nath again for views from the Indian medical device companies about the production-linked incentive and the scheme and the conditions that are associated with it. Are these conducive to Indian companies as well, or should we have a slightly lower investment as well as revenue requirement so that more Indian companies can actually participate in the PLI? It'll be good to have your thoughts, Mr. Nath.
Thank you, Mr. Krishna Kumar. So, on the PLI scheme, our thoughts from IMED is that it was originally designed with 180 crore rupees as basically designed for very large corporates. Overseas and Indian MNCs are the only large companies with something like 500 to 1,000 crore rupee turnover who can possibly try to do something and make use of these kind of schemes, but not below that level. So we've sought, like in the mobile phone scheme, in the mobile phone, they've had but two systems. One is for the large MNCs and one is for domestic champions. So they've permitted domestic champions to aim for a smaller scale. So we've sought a smaller scale of 75 to 90 crore rupees for the domestic champions to be run along with these larger 180 crore rupees for the MNC champions internationally. And as far as the medical device parks goes, we've sought specialization in each of the medical device parks. And they've got a very good rating system now in the schemes that they will be giving 100 crore rupees based on a competition and a challenge to achieve certain minimal common infrastructural facilities. And the model that we had proposed to Andhra Medtech Zone, which AMTZ had followed, and which earlier when we had offered to Tamil Nadu and to Telangana, they had not followed. I'm glad to see that this model has now been incorporated in the DOP scheme itself. So we've recommended to, for example, the state of Haryana to go in. Of course, they want medical device park for everything, but the common facilities and testing facilities can be specialized in certain focal technologies. For example, the one for Karnal, Haryana, we've recommended them to focus upon stainless steel surgical instruments, stainless steel surgical implants, stainless steel surgical hollowware, and stuff like that. The one in Noida, we've recommended to them to focus upon medical electronics of micro level or low volume level. And to the state of Tamil Nadu, we've recommended to them to focus upon instrumentation of the electrical and the electronic kind. And to Kerala to focus upon rubber goods. So the schemes definitely are very conducive. And as far as the international part goes, we recommend that India can target around 1,200 technical collaborations for Indian investors at about $5 million for each of the collaboration to bring in a value of $6 billion. And aim for 200 joint ventures with overseas investors in Korea, Taiwan, because mostly medical device manufacturing all over the world is done by small mid-sized companies, whether in Germany, Italy, Korea, Japan for that matter. And very few are focused on large companies. So all can coexist because all have got specialization. So these 200 joint ventures with about $10 billion each can bring in about $2 billion value. And possibly around 50 MNCs, if they come and invest in the country, like Foxconn did or like Samsung did, at about $40 billion each, they can bring in $2 billion value. So total, we can aim to get in about $10 billion investments in next 5 years' time with supporting policies and by having a coordinated strategy. Thank you.
Excellent, sir. That's quite a detailed overview of what is possible, given the nature of the industry in India today. So essentially, you're saying that promote partnerships with companies across the world, lower the investment requirements so that Indian companies can also participate, and third, focus on specializations so that not everything is created everywhere and it avoids duplication, and also makes the common facilities amenable to the products that potentially could get manufactured in individual parks, right? Excellent, sir. Moving on to Mr. Garg again, both you and Mr. Nath talked about the importance of innovation, right? And global medical devices companies are using India extensively for research and development. So what are your thoughts on how innovation can be stimulated within India in medical devices?
So thanks, Mr. Krishna Kumar. So I think, yes, innovation is definitely a very, very important component of the medtech ecosystem across the globe. And India is no exception. It has to be part of the value chain of medical devices. Before we talk about manufacturing, it has to be a part of overall game plan of the medical device industry, how we want India to be a hub of medtech globally. And that is very clear because unlike pharma, where you have you have generics. I mean, there are no generics in medtech as such, right? I mean, even if you want to even if you want to make a comparable device, there is a slight change either in design or a material or a drug which is used with the device or something like that. So I think it is important for us to realize and understand the overall, I think ecosystem would need innovation as a very, very integral component. And to that extent, many APECMED members have their innovation centers, R&D centers, engineering centers in India. You name a few: Stryker, GE Healthcare, Medtronic now, Boston Scientific, and you name them, Johnson & Johnson, so on and so forth. So you see many of them have already invested heavily on innovation, sort of a pipeline of medical devices in India. And I think it is going to grow only, Mr. Krishna Kumar. And recent example is obviously Medtronic, who have recently invested in the state of Andhra. So I think this interest of India as a hub for innovation is definitely growing in the global medtech community, and we have seen the results of that. And I think the reasons of that are many, and we can talk about it in the further discussion. But yes, many of our members are considering India as a hub for innovation, which is very, very important for medtech, the growth of medtech industry in India from global perspective. Thank you.
Excellent. Moving over to Dr. Sharma. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion about a manufacturing and research ecosystem in India for medical devices. You, sir, have conceptualized and rolled out India's first dedicated medical devices park, right? So based on your experience, how can the manufacturing ecosystem in India be strengthened for medical devices? Dr. Sharma, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm glad you kept me towards the end, because I can then quickly move on to my next meeting. But million thanks to organizers for this session. Before I speak as MD AMTZ, let me speak as a chairperson of the PLI and MedTech Park Guideline Committee, because I chaired both the committees on the medical devices for parks as well as for the PLI scheme. And I'll quickly share some thoughts, particularly because the queries of Mr. Garg and Mr. Rajiv Nath are extremely well placed and well structured queries. The sales of figures being high and the investment required being high for the current level of medtech industry is under consideration. There are many suggestions which we have thankfully received from multiple associations which have been thoroughly analyzed, numerically structured, and perhaps you will see some parts of your wish coming true shortly. They are actually very well placed, particularly also because the COVID has drained working capital out of many institutions and segments. The second thing is inclusion of R&D has always been a key component of PLI, and even in the PLI scheme, you would see that 20% of the investment can be kept as PLI. So if it is, for example, X crores investment required in first year, 0.2x can be earmarked on R&D and R&D investments, including purchase of intellectual property and patents, which is one of its kind intervention in medtech sector in India. On the parks, there are no incentives except that, as you know, when I first proposed the AMTZ model, people were still imagining that common facility means a sewage treatment plant or a water treatment plant, without realizing that when Mr. Rajiv Nath says common facility or Mr. Garg says common facility, they may mean an accelerated aging center for implants and an electromagnetic interference center and so on. And we were first to prove that a park concept works and works exceptionally well for everyone. And exceptionally well because a huge amount of capital infrastructure costs is taken off the burden and shoulders of the manufacturers. Besides this, the incentives in the park are incentives that any state government would provide or Ministry of MSME would provide. Now, having said that, the PLI, which is a very progressive and forward-looking scheme, now with under consideration of reevaluating the investment and sales figures from the feedback received from the industry and the 4 parks on the lines of AMTZ, we are looking at a bright spot in Indian medtech growth curve. Now, what can make us better? And here I'm speaking less on behalf of the public sector and more on the behalf of manufacturing and investment sector. What can make us better? What can make these institutions encash on the PLI and PARC and PMA, which is preferential market access for locally made goods? The PMP, which is phased manufacturing program, which is a very calibrated restructuring of duty structure, and the PLI, which is production linked incentive. So we have 3 Ps, the PMA, the PLI, and the PMP. What can make manufacturers, importers, value adders, designers, researchers encash on these schemes in parks, which is the 4th P, in a better way? I see there are 3 things that can make our 4P approach stronger as a sector. And one is the enormous amount of dues that are pending towards industry from public institutions, departments like health, railways, and so on, where public procurement was done, but the dues are pending for years. Now, what we are not realizing, and nobody better than Mr. Krishna Kumar himself, from a very good background in consultancy can understand, this due towards the industry is what allows them to reinvest. This is which is legally, ethically, morally payable for them, for the goods and services they have supplied to us for the patients. When we pay them back, this is what helps them in their better working capital management. This is what actually helps them invest even in R&D. And I think the substantial amount of dues that are pending towards industry in the long run will hurt the government and the sector more than it can hurt industry in the short term. I sincerely pray and wish that by paying these huge dues, we are not doing any favor to industry. We are actually returning them without any interest what is legally, ethically due towards them anyway. And I feel this is like in a patient, we say if there is an internal bleeding, whatever you do with whatever equipment, the outcome is very, very poor because internally the body is bleeding somewhere. And I am really, disappointed to see the huge amount of dues spending towards medical technology suppliers. It's an internal bleeding in the sector. We don't control it, it will kill the sector. So there is no point, no point blaming people, but we have to understand that a working capital loss in hundreds of crores is not going to do for good to the sector. My point number 2 is what Mr. Vaibhav Garg keeps telling. Medical technology is about incremental innovation. Please look at the last innovation that came in medical technology market. That was 20 years ago, gamma knife and robotic surgery system. And before that came the CT scan and the MRI 25 years ago. Medical technology sector has not seen a really new innovative product for decades now. Unlike pharma that can launch a molecule every month if they want to. We haven't seen. It's all about incremental innovation. And therefore, when you don't reward incremental innovation, you are actually playing in reverse gear. You are driving the sector in reverse gear. And the best way to have incremental innovation rewarded is adopt health technology assessment. I'm saying this because when I started health technology assessment in India in 2012, the word health technology assessment, HTA, didn't exist. Then we catapulted it into an institution in ICMR, and that institution now has 7 nodal centers across the country, including Kalam Institute of Health Technology, which is basketed at AMTZ. Now, Mr. Rajiv Nath will know what value HTA can bring in. It can actually help a decision maker different between auto-disabled syringes and normal syringes. Both are syringes, both do the job of injecting, but you have a cost effectiveness associated with an incremental innovation. We know what various categories of stents or implants can actually do when mapped versus outcome. And this strategy of deploying health technology assessment in benefit package has to go hand in hand with progressive schemes like Ayushman Bharat, where we are covering care. Now, in that care, say cesarean section, are we paying the same amount of package to a hospital which has not replaced the OT light in 30 years? Versus a hospital which has now a 1,60,000 lux colorless, shadowless light? Are we reimbursing the same amount? Today, yes. Now, we may feel in both cases the child is being delivered through cesarean section in an OT, but this non-incremental, non-value addition in the OT light in a labor room which is working for 20 years now can cause a death suddenly, and that may not be counted as outcome because it was a fatal error. So all I'm saying is, Mr. Garg is right. The moment we have incremental innovation and benefit package assessment for that in our schemes, we change the game. We award people and institutions that are investing on technologies and innovations. That's my point number 2. And my point number 3 is when we apply for a visa, we get a link. We can track the visa. If there is a document deficiency, we know, we are told. The same thing can happen with medical technology regulatory pathway. If VFS Global can do it for 142 countries on earth that you can apply for visa in India, why cannot NIC or a software agency do it for all the regulators we have for medical devices? Today, the medical device manufacturers, they apply for NIV Pune for ICMR approval on their kit. They apply to ICMR. They apply for National Institute of Biologicals. We apply today for multiple medical devices to CDSCO. We apply to BIS for PPEs and N95 masks. We apply to AERB for atomic energy related medical equipment, which are ionizing radiation like X-rays and CT scans. We apply to, you would be surprised to hear there is something called insecticide board. Medical device manufacturers apply to Central Insecticide Board for making an insecticide treated bed nets for malaria. We apply to NPPA we apply to Bureau of India, we apply to Legal Metrology Act, we apply to multiple regulators. Now, while each of these regulators work under the regulatory paradigm established under the mandate of an act or a law that they follow, they can all be, so we don't want a common regulator because that's not possible. But we can certainly have a common regulatory platform where a medical device manufacturer, importer, researcher, partner, warehouse owner, they can all apply on that platform, and each regulator can see what they are supposed to see. And the departments can see the pendency across regulators. And a citizen can see how many have been approved and how many have not been approved. So a huge amount of transparency and seamlessness can come if we can have a common regulatory pathway. And I'm again not stepping on the stone of let every regulator do their job as they are doing, but their all activities can be converged on an IT platform. So if I were to relieve Mr. Garg and Mr. Nath with their doubts on the PLI and PARC, because that's well-meaning suggestions have all been considered. You will hear hopefully something very soon, which would be very welcoming and progressive and supportive. But taking forward this discussion, if today there are three things we can do to support industry. One is stop internal bleeding of the sector, pay them their dues. Two, reward innovations, bring health technology assessment in benefit packages and assurance frameworks like Ayushman Bharat. And three, converge all the regulators on a common regulatory platform. And I think besides these schemes and financial incentives and parks, if we can do something really good to help a medical technology industry anywhere in this country, these three things can change their destiny. With that, over to you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. It's quite a exhaustive list of things that needs to be done. Incidentally, I was one of your students in the health technology assessment course that was held in IIT Madras many years ago. And though it was much ahead of its time, I think we learned quite a lot from what the utility of this entire approach can be, especially when it comes to incremental innovation. So one of the themes of this conference is also the concept of international collaborations. And from AMTZ, you have had a fair number of international collaborations. So what are your thoughts as to how that success can be replicated in other parts so that it's clear that we probably need a lot of technology, innovative technology coming to India. How do we kind of stimulate more international cooperation in medical devices?
So before we leash on to international collaborators and collaborations, let us understand why do we need them. We need them for two reasons. One, they need us because of the human resource capabilities we have, both in terms of adequacy and dollar per day. Two, the intellectual property and patents around medical technology is housed in multiple countries. And therefore, these collaborations can be symbiotic relationship where we can give them and they can give us so that we work as one team. And therefore, the joint ventures is just an example of a financial vehicle which can bring the human resource and demographic capabilities that we have and the intellectual capabilities of intellectual property ownership on medical technology that our collaborators have. When we join this partnership together, we drive three benefits. One, we take away a lot of risk from them, which can deter them from coming by themselves. Because today in AMTZ, we have actually an international collaborator visiting, but they are not visiting alone. They are visiting with an Indian partner. Why? Because if they were to come by themselves, 100% of the risk in an unknown land with 200 plus languages and a very looping system of governance that we have might deter them. So when they have a partner here who can maneuver, who understands the culture and philosophy of work here, where it is not a crime to work half an hour extra in a shift. You are not violating, considered to be violating somebody's human rights if you ask someone to stay back in office for an extra hour, right? Now, so we first benefit is we take away the entirety of risk from our collaborator. Second, we bring the financial strength into Indian collaborating business, because then the entire pooling of working capital or investment that an Indian partner has to pool from a very interest heavy economy gets diluted if a foreign collaborator brings the financial support, at least in parts, from economies that are financially less straining in terms of interest rates, where interest rates are 2% or 3%. It brings in a value which suddenly converts an aeroplane into a rocket for a company, because then you suddenly have resources to do things that you want to do without burdening with the interest rates. And third, markets. These collaborations can actually encompass markets where Indian market can take care of their baseline sale, because the market is growing, unsaturated and huge. The baseline sales, which allows a company to an enterprise to stay afloat with bare minimum revenues from the Indian market, and encash the higher delta revenues with every incremental international market. So we have substantial number of collaborations. To give an example, there is only one company in the world that makes a robotic cardiac surgery system. That's in the US. The second one is at AMTZ, again in collaboration. We have MRI superconducting magnet. As we speak, a brand new India's first Faraday cage for superconducting magnet is being built at AMTZ as we speak today. These are possibilities with collaboration, without which we can't do it ourselves, because of the human resource capabilities we have and the IP capabilities the other countries have encompassed over the last few decades. But it will all give us collective benefit of markets, risk dilution, and financial resources that otherwise is not possible. So with that, over to you once again. And after this, please excuse me if I have to go for another meeting, but I enjoyed thoroughly being with such lovely friends.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma. It is wonderful to have your thoughts, not just from AMTZ, but also from the vantage point of being the head of the PLI and the Medical Park scheme. It's quite helpful. Moving on to Mr. Vibhav Garg, one of the things which Dr. Sharma mentioned was the human resources capability, not just in terms of the skills, but also at an attractive price point and the scale that India offers. So how can India look at different, I mean, obviously medical devices is multidisciplinary. So how can India help, development of human capabilities in medical devices across multiple functions? Any thoughts from you, Mr. Garg?
Sure, Mr. Kishkumar, I think let me first put on record, from my personal behalf and behalf of APECMed, whatever Dr. Sharma mentioned was actually music to the ears, for an industry person, right? Getting all the dues out and, sort of incremental innovation getting recognized and a common platform for all regulatory approval. I think these are like long spoken requests from industry to government. And I think and he was absolutely bingo on point, if they can be realized, it will definitely help, all the companies in MedTech really grow, and that will actually grow the whole sector because as he rightly mentioned, that the companies will reinvest into the business, whether it is R&D or innovation or manufacturing or distribution or whatever it is. So I think I wanted to put this on record, that was definitely all support from industry for those points. And coming back to your question, Mr. Kishan Kumar, I think, yes, he's right. I think human resources is definitely one area that, all the global manufacturers look at India from a pool perspective. And to be honest with you, the cost not so much is competitive if really see, other destinations, especially Southeast Asia, South America, and so on and so forth. So the cost still is very competitive, with other markets. But I think if I talk about the scale, right, if I want to set up a real large R&D center or innovation center, if I really want to get into a requirement of, okay, I need 200, polymer engineers, maybe I will not get that anywhere else, right? So I think that scale is something which makes India attractive, particularly for R&D and innovation and engineering kind of setup that our member companies have put in India. And I think also one area that we now see growing in India is multidisciplinary approach, which was, which historically, unfortunately, wasn't there. But now a lot of institutions are coming in, and I myself come from BITS Pilani, where I did my biotechnology after pharmacy, right? And then people are doing chemistry after mechanical engineering, and so on and so forth. So I think these kind of institutions are coming in now, which provide this opportunity of multidisciplinary learning and skilling, which is very, very important for the medical device sector. And I think the more we have these co-located, say, engineering college and medical colleges, and the programs like Stanford India by Design, right, which is bringing doctors, engineers, pharmacists, and whatnot together to be able to put in those capabilities required to conceptualize, to design, to prototyping in medical devices, I think is now seen in India. And I think if we keep growing and keep supporting those initiatives, I think India can definitely realize the dream of being the medtech hub in the world. Mr. Krishnakumar, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Garg. I think that's important. Yes, that we have scale and also capabilities. Cost is incidental. I know that experience of industries like IT have shown that the cost advantages are transient, but the capabilities and the scale, I think, is something which is certainly unique to India. So, just to kind of put up the last question for both Mr. Nath and you, we've seen examples of, for example, auto industry with Suzuki coming into India and setting up a whole ecosystem for manufacturing. Same thing happened in the South with in the auto components. We've seen a similar examples in mobile phone manufacturing and, of course, in pharma as well. So, in terms of what are some of the lessons that potentially can be learned from some of these partnerships, which we've seen to be successful, so that the Indian industry as well as the global companies essentially work together so that the overall benefits accrue to the citizens and, of course, to everybody involved. Any thoughts first from Mr. Nath and then from you, Mr. Garg?
Thank you for the query. Just before I answer this directly, I would just like to add to what Vibhav has mentioned about in terms of creating a pool of talent and building it up. So what IMED has been doing with other organizations, steps we've taken, under the Indian certification for medical devices with QCI, we have introduced a system to map the competency of trainers, consultants, and auditors. And once you have something which is measurable for mapping, then you can always build upon it. The same approach we did also for biomedical engineers. So we created along with QCI and Andhra MedTech Zone, IMED was part of the creation of the IBSC, the Indian Biomedical Skill Consortium, which has now graduated to be a council. And initially it was only about mapping the skills of technicians or scientists or biomedical engineers, and now it is about building the competency also on that. That was for the human resources part. Regarding collaborations, both as MD of HMD and as IMET, I strongly believe in collaborations. Nobody can succeed by himself. It's not possible. One has to reach out and one needs to collaborate. Collaborations can be for an exporter to be selling through distributors or under a buyback arrangement to a joint venture partner, or as an OEM supplier to a large company under their brand name, are ways to access the global markets and to enter the international arena. And when you do that, your partners will teach you to become better. So initially, even HMD also, we started initially our journey as OEM partners to some of the large buyers. And when they would come and audit our company for quality and for compliances and help us to bridge the gap on technological and quality delivery needs, we learned from them and we grew together. And then, of course, comes the second part of partnership by joint ventures and inequity. But going forward, more and more companies would have to use not a singular collaboration, but multiple collaborations. So in HMD ourselves, we are now talking in terms of consortiums. For example, our next product is drug delivery. I will not state it fully now, but yes, if the designer is in UK, the financial brain is in America, the technology platform is in Korea, the delivery is in India. So when you have got multiple people coming together with their strengths and we build on the strengths, this is the way to take it forward. Whether the PLI scheme or the MedTech Park or individual companies, one key lesson in management always has been build on your strengths, address your weaknesses. Don't focus on your weaknesses. So wherever we already are strong, and we see that in automotive, we see that in electronics now, we see that in pharma, where we already are strong in our engineering skills, in our fair business methods, let's build on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think it's important. Yeah, that's true that I think this is the age of collaborations and multiple collaborations, which are, of course, because I think the skills that are required are pretty specialized, and therefore any one organization may not have all the skills required. The final word to Mr. Garg, the same question around international collaborations, like what we've seen in other industries. Is that something which is a template for medical devices industry?
No, absolutely. I think Mr. Nath absolutely said it, and I think it is important because particularly for a multidisciplinary industry like medical devices, collaboration is the key. And just to give some examples, APECMed members have been collaborating in India. Whether you talk about GE with Bell for creating those magnets, whether you talk about Terumo with Penpal, and so on and so forth. So I think it is definitely the need of the hour where we collaborate, because as Mr. Nath was talking about, that there is no one company who is self-sufficient in every aspect of medical technologies, right? Because it's a very complex industry in itself, and incremental innovation makes it even more complex, because every 2-3 years you are bringing a newer version, a newer sort of a technology to the board. So I think yes, and he was also mentioning about that manufacturing or innovation happens at a boutique level, right? Which is not carrying the basket of legacies and responsibilities. And I think that's where the innovation is happening, the design is happening, right? So yes, I think collaboration is the key, and we will see more and more collaboration from APECMed members in the near future with many Indian companies, and more than companies, I think also equally important collaboration are with research and academic institutions of the country, because I think as Dr. Sharma was talking about, IIT Madras has a lot of capabilities, and especially the 8, the centers that you were referring to, which are evaluation centers of the Medical Technology Assessment Board, are the key organizations to have collaboration with, because they have a lot of knowledge base with them. And similarly, other organizations in the country, NIPERs of the country, who are doing very well in medical technologies now, they also have started courses in medical technologies and medical devices. So I think not just the private-public collaboration, but public-public collaboration, private collaboration, academia, industry collaboration. I think all sort of collaboration will have to be come into existence, when medical devices in India will become a growing industry, a hub in global parlance, if I say so. Krishan, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma, Mr. Garg, and Mr. Nath. It's been a fascinating conversation. I think all of you gave very, practitioners' viewpoints and not typical high-level thoughts, which covered not just the challenges of the medical devices industry, but also the larger healthcare ecosystem in India. Yes, sir.
So thank you for the opportunity. Vibhav, I would like to make a request to you, to your colleagues in EPICMed and the other large organization associations in terms of collaborations going forward. Most of the organizations are presented in India through their country heads who have a different specialization. What I would like to seek through you is, if the 100-odd companies who are operating in India in the medtech field, if you could have a listing of their manufacturing directors and the supply chain directors worldwide, and if those contact details could be shared with IMED Secretariat and with the Department of Pharmaceuticals, we would in turn share with them the Indian champions who've got dependable credibility. And then we can do a cross-map linkage going forward so that they know whom to look forward in terms of collaborations. And we can seek, in terms of going forward, linkages for going forward to make it a productive win-win situation for both the organizations, the mid-sized companies in India and the large MNC players internationally. Please.
Sure, Mr. Nath. Absolutely. No, I think that's a great suggestion, and we will definitely work through EPICMed Secretariat on that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great. So thank you all for your time and for your insights on the panel today. I now turn you back to the Master of Ceremonies to wind up the session. Ms. Sapna, back to you. Yeah. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. And we thank all our eminent panelists for this wonderful, very informative session we had on medical devices, transforming India's potential into reality through international collaborations. And must say, was a very informative, interactive session we had. Once again, thanking our distinguished moderator, Mr. Krishna Kumar, and all our eminent panelists, Mr. Rajiv Nath, Dr. J.K. Sharma, and Mr. Vibhav Garg. Thank you once again to each one of you. And we thank once again all our participants, especially those who have logged in internationally. And a special thanks to all of you because of the difference in the time zones. Still, you are here with us. So ladies and gentlemen, the next session we have on ramping up COVID-19 testing to restart the economy, which will commence at 1400 hours, that is 2 o'clock. We look forward to seeing all of you again. Meanwhile, once again, thanking our exhibitors and inviting all our participants to kindly visit the exhibition meanwhile. Thank you once again. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Namaskar.
Thanks everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.